The sapphire necklace caught the light as I fastened it around my neck, each facet throwing blue fire across the hotel mirror. My husband had given it to me for our 20th anniversary, back when gifts still meant something other than guilt management. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose entirely. Through the bathroom door, I could hear Marcus pacing in our suite at the Ritz-Carlton, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and urgent. "I can't talk now. Tomorrow, after the gala. Everything changes tomorrow. Tomorrow, after the gala." When he planned to announce, in front of 300 of Chicago's most influential people, at the charity event I'd spent 11 months organizing, that our marriage was over. That he was leaving me for Jennifer Hastings, the 34-year-old VP of marketing at his firm. The woman I'd mentored, whose career I'd helped build, who'd sat at my dining table countless times discussing strategy and ambition. I knew because I'd found the speech on his laptop 3 weeks ago. Carefully written, emotionally manipulative, designed to paint him as a man who'd finally found the courage to choose happiness. Complete with the announcement that he'd be stepping down from the foundation we'd built together, the one bearing my family's name, to pursue new opportunities with someone who shared his vision for the future. The foundation my grandmother had established. The one I'd grown from a small local charity into a national organization. The one where Marcus had positioned himself as co-founder, though his primary contribution had been charisma and my connections. But Marcus didn't know that I knew. Didn't know that I'd spent 3 weeks making my own preparations, consulting attorneys, forensic accountants, and one particularly skilled private investigator. Didn't know that the documents in my evening bag would detonate his carefully constructed exit strategy more effectively than any public confrontation ever could. I stepped out of the bathroom in the black Valentino gown I'd chosen specifically for tonight. Elegant, expensive, memorable. The dress of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. Marcus looked up from his phone, and for just a moment, I saw guilt flicker across his face before his professional smile smoothed it away. "You look beautiful, Claire." "Thank you." I kept my voice warm, familiar. Let him think everything was proceeding according to his plan. "My name is Claire Ashford Monroe. I'm 47 years old. And tonight, at the most important event of Chicago's social calendar, my husband of 23 years planned to humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered. What he didn't know was that I'd already dismantled his future, piece by careful piece, with the precision of someone who'd spent 2 decades building empires while he took credit for the architecture. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why tonight mattered, why I'd chosen to handle things this way instead of with lawyers and private offices, you need to understand what Marcus had spent 23 years systematically taking from me while convincing me, and everyone else, that he was giving. We'd met at Northwestern, both of us ambitious MBA students with different definitions of success. Mine involved building something meaningful with my family's resources and reputation. His involved acquiring those resources and that reputation for himself. I'd fallen in love with his confidence, his vision, his ability to command a room. What I'd mistaken for partnership was actually colonization. Marcus didn't want to build something with me, he wanted to become me, or rather, to become the public face of everything I created while I did the actual work in the background. The Ashford Foundation had been my grandmother's legacy, a small charitable trust focused on women's education. When I took it over at 25, it had $2 million in assets and funded scholarships for 30 women annually. 22 years later, it had $200 million in assets and programs in 47 states. I'd built that. Every grant proposal, every donor relationship, every strategic partnership. Marcus had given speeches, attended galas, and collected accolades while I worked 80-hour weeks making the actual machinery function. But somewhere along the way, the narrative had shifted. In media coverage, Marcus became the visionary behind the Ashford Foundation's incredible growth. I became his partner, rather than the architect. My family's name on the foundation became window dressing, while Marcus positioned himself as the transformative leader. I'd allowed it because I'd believed in our partnership. Because I'd thought marriage meant sharing credit, supporting each other's strengths, building something larger than either of us alone. I'd been wrong. The affair with Jennifer had started 18 months ago, according to my investigator. But the planning to take over my foundation, to push me out and position himself as the sole visionary, had been in progress for nearly 5 years. 5 years of strategic positioning, of hiring board members loyal to him, of shifting public perception so that he, not I, was seen as the foundation's driving force, of setting up parallel structures that would allow him to continue the work and collect the acclaim, even after divorcing the woman whose name and family money had made it all possible. Marcus was a patient man. I'd give him that. But I'd had 3 weeks to be patient too. And unlike him, I actually understood how money, power, and institutional control worked. The gala was being held in the grand ballroom of the Art Institute, a space I'd personally selected and helped design for tonight's event. 300 guests representing Chicago's philanthropic elite, corporate leadership, and political establishment. A $2,000 per plate dinner that would raise over $1 million for women's education programs. It was supposed to be my triumph. The culminating event of a year-long campaign that had exceeded every goal. Marcus had planned to make it his exit. As we walked through the museum's entrance, photographers' flashes created a strobe effect. Marcus placed his hand on my lower back, the gesture possessive and practiced. To anyone watching, we looked like the power couple we'd always appeared to be. Remember, he murmured in my ear, smile and work the room. This is your night. My night. The irony was almost funny. Inside, the ballroom looked spectacular. Ice sculptures, thousands of white orchids, tables set with crystal and gold. The Foundation's 23rd annual gala, my 11th as director. Everything perfect, everything controlled. I spotted Jennifer immediately, stunning in emerald silk, positioned near the bar with several board members Marcus had cultivated. She saw us and raised her glass slightly, a gesture that could mean anything to anyone watching but that I understood as acknowledgement. Tomorrow, she thought, she'd be standing beside Marcus as his partner instead of in the shadows as his affair. Claire. Margaret Westbrook, the Foundation's board chair and my grandmother's closest friend, swept over to embrace me. Everything looks magnificent. You've outdone yourself. Thank you, Margaret. I returned her hug, catching Marcus's smile over her shoulder. He thought he'd won her over during their private lunches, the ones he didn't know I knew about. He thought wrong. The evening progressed with practiced elegance. Cocktails, dinner, speeches from scholarship recipients whose lives had been changed by the Foundation's work. I sat at the head table between Marcus and Senator Richardson, who'd been a Foundation supporter since my grandmother's days. You should be very proud, Claire, the senator said during dessert. Your grandmother would be amazed by what you've built. What we've built, Marcus interjected smoothly, his hand finding mine on the table. Claire and I have always been a team. I squeezed his hand, playing my part. Let him have this moment. Let him think everything was proceeding exactly as he'd planned. After dinner, the program began. Video presentations of Foundation success stories. Speeches from board members. And then, Marcus stood to deliver what was supposed to be a standard leadership address. I watched him walk to the podium, handsome and confident in his Tom Ford tuxedo. Watched him smile at the crowd, at Jennifer positioned strategically where he could see her, at me sitting calmly at the head table. Good evening, he began, his voice warm and commanding. 23 years ago, I met an extraordinary woman who changed my life. This was it. The beginning of his carefully crafted exit speech. I'd read it so many times I'd memorized it. The setup about how we'd built something beautiful together. The transition to growth and change. The revelation that sometimes people evolve in different directions. The announcement that he'd be stepping aside to pursue new opportunities, phrased to sound noble rather than like abandonment. The audience leaned forward, sensing something significant coming. Marcus continued, Claire Ashford Monroe brought me into her family's legacy, and together we transformed a small trust into a national force for women's education. But tonight, I need to be honest about something. I stood up. The movement was unexpected enough that Marcus paused mid-sentence. 300 pairs of eyes shifted to me. I apologize for interrupting, I said, my voice clear and steady. But there's something the board and our supporters should know before Marcus continues. Marcus's face went white. This wasn't in his script. He hadn't prepared for this variable. I walked to the podium, each step measured, and stood beside him. "May I?" I gestured to the microphone. He had no choice but to step aside, trapped by decorum and the very public nature of the moment. I faced the crowd, these people I'd worked with for decades, and smiled. "Marcus was about to tell you that our marriage is ending. That he's stepping down from the foundation to pursue new opportunities. That despite the foundation bearing my family's name, his vision and leadership have been the driving force behind our success." The room was absolutely silent. Marcus stood frozen beside me. He was going to announce this tonight because he believed public pressure would prevent me from fighting back. That I'd be too humiliated, too shocked, too concerned about appearances to do anything except accept his narrative gracefully. I opened my evening bag and removed a small stack of documents. What Marcus didn't know is that I've been aware of his plans for 3 weeks. Aware of his affair with Jennifer Hastings. I gestured toward Jennifer, whose emerald dress suddenly seemed too bright, too obvious. Aware of his systematic efforts to position himself as the foundation's leader while I did the actual work. Aware of his plans to push me out of the organization my grandmother founded while continuing to benefit from my family's resources and reputation. Marcus found his voice. "Claire, this isn't. Let me finish." My tone was pleasant but firm. "In the past 3 weeks, I've done what I always do when facing a complex problem. I've analyzed the situation, consulted experts, and developed a solution." I handed the first document to Margaret Westbrook. "This is a forensic accounting report showing that Marcus has been systematically diverting foundation resources to a separate entity he established last year. Not enough to trigger audits, but over $2 million in total." The room erupted in whispers. Margaret's face went pale as she scanned the document. I handed another document to Senator Richardson. "This is documentation of grant applications Marcus approved for organizations where he or Jennifer had financial interests. Conflicts of interest that were never disclosed to the board." More whispers, louder now. "And this," I held up the final document, "is my resignation as the foundation's director, effective immediately." That got everyone's attention, including Marcus's. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd thought I'd fight to stay, that my attachment to my grandmother's legacy would make me vulnerable. "I'm resigning," I continued, "because I've spent 3 weeks establishing a new foundation. The Ashford Women's Initiative, funded with $150 million from my family trust and independent of any structure Marcus has access to. 37 of our current program officers and staff have already agreed to transition to the new organization. 17 of our 23 largest donors have committed to redirecting their support." I watched understanding dawn on Marcus's face. He'd planned to take the foundation. I'd simply built a new one and hollowed out everything he'd thought he was claiming. The board, of course, has the right to continue operating the existing foundation with Marcus as director, if they choose. Though they may want to review the forensic accounting report first. The senator has already indicated the Justice Department may have questions about some of the grant irregularities. Margaret Westbrook stood up. "Claire, we need to discuss this privately." "Of course. I'm available tomorrow." I smiled at the crowd. I apologize for the disruption to what should have been a celebration. For those interested in supporting women's education through ethical, transparent, and effective programming, information about the Ashford Women's Initiative is in the folders at your seats. We begin operations Monday. I turned to Marcus, who looked like he was trying to decide whether to explode in rage or crumble in despair. "You wanted honesty tonight, darling. So here it is. You spent 23 years building a reputation on my work, my family's money, and my connections. You plan to walk away with all of that while leaving me with nothing but humiliation. Instead, you're left with an empty foundation, a fraud investigation, and Jennifer, who I suspect will be far less interested once she realizes you're not actually the architect of anything except your own mythology. Once she realizes you're not actually the architect of anything except your own mythology." I gathered my bag and walked off the stage, my heels clicking against marble. Behind me, the room exploded into chaos, shouts, questions, the scraping of chairs as people stood. I didn't look back. In the lobby, my attorney was waiting, along with my daughter Sophie, who'd flown in from New York for tonight without Marcus knowing. At 25, she'd inherited my analytical mind and her father's charm, a devastating combination. Mom. She hugged me tightly. That was incredible. That was necessary, I corrected. There's a difference. My phone was already buzzing with messages, texts, and calls. I ignored them all except one, from Margaret Westbrook. We need to talk. Emergency board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Marcus is suspended pending investigation. What happens now? Sophie asked as we walked to the waiting car. Now we build something better, I said. Something that doesn't require me to share credit with someone who mistakes proximity to power for actual competence. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Marcus tried to fight, of course, claiming he'd been blindsided, that I'd violated some undefined marital trust by planning my exit without warning him. The irony was apparently lost on him. He ended up with our condo in Lincoln Park and enough settlement money to live comfortably, though not extravagantly. The forensic investigation led to his quiet resignation from several boards and the dissolution of his relationship with Jennifer, who'd indeed lost interest once she realized Marcus was more liability than asset. The Ashford Foundation, after extensive restructuring and the departure of Marcus's loyalists, actually merged with my new organization 8 months after the gala. Margaret Westbrook led the negotiations, determined to preserve my grandmother's legacy in a form that reflected its original values. The Ashford Women's Initiative became the largest foundation focused on women's education in the country, with $400 million in assets and programs that actually worked because they were designed by people who cared about outcomes rather than acclaim. I led it for 3 years before stepping back to focus on advisory work, mentoring the next generation of women building their own legacies. Sophie took over operations and proved to be even more effective than I'd been, unencumbered by the need to share credit or manage someone else's ego. 5 years after that gala, I was having coffee with a former foundation board member when she asked the question I'd heard variations of countless times: do you regret how you handled it? The public nature of it all. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret standing up in front of 300 people and dismantling my husband's careful plans? Did I regret the headlines, the whispers, the way that night became a cautionary tale in Chicago's philanthropic circles? No, I said finally. Marcus chose that venue because he thought public humiliation would control me. He weaponized my concern for appearances, my dedication to the foundation, my grandmother's legacy. He thought I'd be too paralyzed by propriety to fight back. But you weren't. I wasn't. And more importantly, I was tired of doing world-changing work in the shadows, while men who contributed a fraction of the effort collected all the recognition. The public nature of that night wasn't revenge, it was testimony. Every woman in that room who'd ever had her work attributed to a man, every person who'd built something real while someone else performed leadership, they all saw what happens when you stop accepting crumbs from your own table. The board member smiled. I heard from 3 different women who left their husbands within a year of that night, after finally recognizing the patterns in their own marriages. See. I raised my coffee cup. The gala raised over $1 million for scholarships. But that night's real contribution to women's empowerment was teaching them that you don't have to suffer humiliation quietly just because someone's counting on your compliance. Last month, I attended a different gala, one honoring Sophie's work expanding the foundation into international programs. I sat in the audience while my daughter accepted recognition for her achievements, spoke about her vision, owned her accomplishments without qualification or shared credit. Marcus was there too, at a table in the back. We'd reached a place of civil distance, the kind of polite interaction that acknowledges shared history without pretending the past was other than what it was. During the cocktail hour, we ended up standing near each other by chance. Sophie's done remarkable things with the foundation, he said, his voice neutral. She has. Though I'd argue the foundation's success started long before Sophie took over. With my grandmother, actually. And continued through my work expanding it nationally. It was a small correction, but an important one. I'd spent too many years letting achievements be misattributed to be careless about history now. Marcus nodded slowly. I suppose you're right. I I've had a lot of time to think about how things unfolded. How I positioned myself versus what I actually contributed. And what have you concluded? That you were always the architect. I was just very good at standing in front of cameras. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was closer to honesty than he'd managed in 23 years of marriage. The difference between us, I said gently, is that I built things because I believed in the work. You built a persona because you believed in the performance. When those two approaches collided, only one could survive with integrity intact. We stood in silence for a moment, watching Sophie network with donors, brilliant and confident and unencumbered by anyone else's need for validation. I heard you're advising several other foundations now, Marcus said, helping them develop more transparent leadership structures. I am. Turns out there's significant demand for expertise in building organizations where work and credit are aligned. Who knew? The irony in my voice was gentle, not cutting. Marcus almost smiled. I should let you get back to the event. I just wanted to say, what you built, what you're still building, it's extraordinary. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it out loud. Thank you. I accepted the acknowledgement without fanfare. Some things don't require extended discussion, just recognition. As he walked away, I thought about that night at the Ritz-Carlton, fastening my grandmother's sapphire necklace while my husband paced and planned his dramatic exit. I'd felt many things that night: anger, betrayal, grief for what I'd thought we'd built together. But underneath all of that had been something else: clarity. The absolute certainty that I would not be diminished, would not accept someone else's narrative about my worth, would not go quietly into whatever supporting role Marcus had scripted for me. That clarity had carried me through the gala, through the divorce, through building something new from the rubble of what I'd thought was partnership. And now, watching my daughter accept recognition for work she'd genuinely done, surrounded by an organization built on actual merit rather than performed leadership, I felt something I'd been missing for 23 years. Peace. Not because I'd destroyed Marcus, I hadn't. He'd landed on his feet, found consulting work, rebuilt a smaller but stable life. Peace because I'd finally stopped accepting less than I was worth. Stopped sharing credit that wasn't shared. Stopped making myself smaller so someone else could feel larger. The sapphire necklace caught the light as I raised my glass to toast my daughter's achievements. My grandmother had worn it when she founded the original Ashford Trust 70 years ago. I'd worn it the night I reclaimed her legacy from someone who'd mistaken proximity for ownership. Someday, Sophie would wear it too. And she'd know exactly what it represented: not revenge, but restoration. Not destruction, but the building of something that couldn't be taken because it was founded on truth rather than performance. The greatest revenge, I'd learned, wasn't destroying someone who'd tried to diminish you. It was building something so substantial, so undeniable, that their attempts at erasure became irrelevant by comparison.